Hi, my name is Adam Rosenfield out of Austin, Texas. I'm an HR professional. I love talent management. I love creating inclusive spaces and really changing the way of how people think about HR. I love building teams and I love creating community. And with creating community, a chance meeting led me to my co-partner over here, Madison Butler.
We just had our 1 year anniversary or LinkedIn
We
anniversary.
did our 1 year LinkedIn anniversary.
So my name is Madison Butler. Most people would know me as the blue-haired recruiter. I'm also out of Austin, Texas. I do not necessarily refer to myself as an HR professional, but I am the VP of People at Sourced Craft Cocktails. I'm really passionate about breaking down the status quo, building inclusive teams, and creating spaces that are psychologically safe for our people where they can thrive and grow and really enjoy their time.
Cool. So I want to talk about something that has been on a lot of people's radars, especially in the past few months. I think HR professionals get. I think this happens to HR professionals a lot, and that is the utterance of the term "I don't see color." Now, obviously, we have our opinions, but Madison, I want to go for you. What does it mean when somebody says, "I don't see color," and how does that relate to the HR professional?
So I think it's interesting because I think growing up, even I was taught to not see color and that everyone is the same and everything is sunny and roses. And that's just not reality. And so when you tell someone you don't see color, you're also erasing their lived experience. So you are not acknowledging the way that they walk through the world and the challenges they face based on how they look. And so obviously y'all can see me. I am a Black woman. I present as a Black woman, which also means I'm treated as a Black woman when I go into certain spaces, when I walk into certain doors, and there's nothing I can do to change that. There will always be people who treat me differently based on how I look, regardless of how I communicate, how I talk, where I went to college, what I do for a job. And so when you tell me you don't see color, you're inherently erasing all of that and just saying, well, you're the same as everyone else. And that's just, it's not accurate. And I think it's really important as people in our world to acknowledge the different experiences that everyone has, because they're going to bring them into the workplace, with who they are.
I want to follow up on that because I think it's important so I know a lot of people that are watching this are HR departments of one, and you probably have executives that maybe have these metrics that say, hey, you have to hire X type of people, X type of people, X type of people. And I find that, that does more to hurt diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts more than anything. I find that I find that by putting a number on somebody, you are completely discounting you are completely discounting their lived experience. And as an HR department of one, you need to find a way to make that business case and understand that having people with different lived experiences is important to the success of your organization. What say you to that, Madison?
For sure. And so, for me, I get asked the question a lot around, diversity sourcing and all of these things. And yes, it is really important to source for diversity. It's important to hire for diversity. But what I really need people to do is create space for diversity. Like, you need to have an organization that is set up for people who look like me and people who don't look like me and people who think differently than I do. And so when you're making the business case, my business case is really for that piece more so than the hiring. Because if you hire a bunch of really awesome people with diverse backgrounds, but you're not ready to protect them and to keep them safe, then you've done everyone a disservice, including yourself. And so my business case is, how do you create an environment where people feel safe, heard, valued? Because at the end of the day, you're going to protect your bottom line by protecting your retention numbers.
So that's an interesting thing you said, because you said make it safe, or keep them safe. Which, some of our old school mates might say, well, wait a second, now you're a big snowflake. What does that mean? Keep them safe? I'm not their babysitter. And so, what does it mean when it says when you say keep them safe?
For sure. So the thing about, being at work is you're essentially working for someone else's dream. And so while you're working for someone else's dream, you should feel like your identity is accepted regardless of what that is. And so that means as leaders, we have to be comfortable calling out biased behaviors, racist behaviors, homophobic behaviors, because those are not opinions. They're not who you are inherently, they're hate. And so when we're not willing to call those things out, we are inherently harming the people who I didn't choose to be Black. I didn't choose to be queer. Like, I'm here. And so you're harming those people. And so those microaggressions and those racist comments and that offhand joke, at the end of the day, that's trauma. And that's part of the lived experience, but the more trauma you have compiled from your workplace, the more likely you are, one, to leave, but it is going to be something you take into your next workplace and your workplace after that. And I think as leaders, we have the responsibility of making sure that we leave people better than we found them, not the opposite.
So I want to bring back to a couple of words that you said that have recently taken precedence in the American vernacular. So I think one of the biggest things we're talking about is microaggressions. And as an HR department of one, and as just an HR department in general, especially around a homogenous workforce, I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand what microaggressions are and how they manifest. So tell me, what are some sort of microaggressions that might come up in the workplace that maybe people don't know about?
For sure. And so I want to make sure that when we talk about microaggressions, we don't minimize them to being micro. They're not micro. They're essentially smaller fractures in a larger wound. But for example, so things that are said to me is like, oh my God, I'm so surprised by how articulate you are. Why is that shocking? And so those are things you just hear over and over and over again, or like comments about your hair. I know for me, it's like, oh, can I touch your hair? Does it feel different than my hair? Do you wash it? Does it smell weird? Like things like that. And so people don't realize that they're thoughts that are in their head that are now just like being word vomited onto people. And they come out as microaggressions, and they may not. There's definitely a lot of times where there's no bad intent, but as humans, as allies, as people who are looking to create a better workforce, we need to be able to be self-aware of our thoughts and the things that we say and understand how they may harm people.
Well, I would even say that microaggressions, it comes even at the start of the hiring process, where sometimes people say, "Oh, that's an interesting name. Where are you from?" And a lot of people, and what's fascinating is, I mean, number one, your name is Madison, and no, but it is you are not, I say, afforded that opportunity, which sounds weird, of the question of, wait, Madison. That's an interesting name, because it is a normal homogenized American name. And
but I get the opposite, which means if someone's talked to me on the phone
they say,
and
you
they
don't look
see
like
me and they're like, oh, you're Madison. I wasn't expecting you.
Yeah. But I think that's an issue that a lot of HR leaders should recognize and that's why people do blind resumes. But I don't really think blind resumes work.
Nope.
Because you
I'm
have to have, when, and HR leaders, you got to realize that blind resumes do not work. Your hiring process has to start with being actively anti-racist first before anything. And so I want to go to that because I know people know what racist is. I would think, maybe you would think, but what do you think the difference is? And Kevin, I'd like to hear your voice as well. But what is the difference between not racist and anti-racist?
So I'd like to talk about the blind hiring piece.
Okay, let's do that first.
So I think blind hiring is this thing that's like really kind of like taken off, and it's like very trendy, and people feel like they're really fixing the hiring process. My problem is it is not enough to fix the hiring process. So say you fix the hiring process, you get a whole bunch of diverse candidates in your pipeline, you hire a couple, now what? Because you've only fixed the hiring process. You haven't fixed your hiring manager. You took like technology and tried to solve human problems. And so at the end of the day, now you're just sending all of these candidates to go work for people who you didn't train or teach or coach on how to manage them. So that is my biggest issue with blind hiring is like, yes, awesome, you made the process great, but if that's not like representative of your actual organization, then one, you've kind of lied to people about what their experience will be like. But two, you're not actually fixing the issue, which like bias is a human issue. It's not a technology issue. It's not an AI issue. And like, yes, we can talk for hours about, you know, the biases within AI. And
well, would you say bias is, so we talk about systems. Would you say bias is a human system gone wrong?
100%, because you know what? Tons of times, like tons of AI is biased, but at the end of the day, it was created by a human.
And I think that's what people need to realize is that you can't bias or technology, AI processes cannot fix the bias in you, the inherent bias in you. When somebody has the power to hire, fire, and discipline, if they are not properly trained or if they just have an inherent bias, then your system will continue to remain flawed. And I think that's really what HR leaders and talent leaders need to understand. You can put out a beautiful statement. There are people who wrote beautiful copy after George Floyd. It was almost poetic. And then you dove into their organization and their systems were all messed up. But why were their systems messed up? It's because of the people.
Correct. So yes, I would agree. It's a human systems error, essentially.
But I want to start because we start with the systems, but let's take it even further because I want to talk about the whole concept of anti-racism. Because there are a lot of people that say, well, I'm not racist. I'm not racist at all. But what is not being racist and what is being anti-racist? How does that differ?
I want to hear your answer.
Okay. So my answer is there's a difference between a Band-Aid and going straight to the diagnosis and going straight to the symptoms of the problem. So saying I'm not racist is a Band-Aid. And you're still that wound is still manifesting and it's still growing and nothing's being done to stop it. Whereas actively being anti-racist is a proactive move. It is we are calling it out and we are creating ways to stamp it out in our system. We are getting rid of bad actors. We are eliminating the bias in performance reviews. We are creating it's not just about, hey, I want to hire that Black woman. It's how can I create a pipeline from a specific place to ensure that I have talent coming in. That's not necessarily anti-racist, but it's more about how to create within your organization. But it's also, how am I calling out bad actors? What am I doing? Am I disciplining them? I think that's anti-racist versus being not racist, saying, please don't do that, and nothing happening. What about you, Kevin?
So I heard this really great analogy. And first off, thank you for letting me be a part of this conversation. But I heard this great analogy yesterday talking about people who say that they're not racist versus anti-racist. And the analogy was, think about your home. And there's that one room in your house that is kind of the collect-all room. Like you've got people coming over. And so you do a quick clean, but you just kind of throw everything into that room. And that eventually builds up over time because you've put off this, well, look at my house, look at how clean it is, but don't go in that room. That room's full of junk. I mean, I've got a room like that right now I haven't unpacked since I moved in this house 7 years ago. And those people who are dealing with the thought of, well, I'm not racist, but I'm not anti-racist. They're not addressing the room. They're not addressing that dirty space because it means I have to have an internal reflection. And I was reading this letter from Representative John Lewis in the New York Times. It was published yesterday. And there's one particular thing that I think that gets to the root issue for what will it take to move from being not racist to anti-racist. And this is what he said. He said, if we were to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concert goers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. There's a deeply rooted issue, and especially I see that out here in West Texas, highly conservative, and there's a lot of good people who will say, I'm not racist, but they won't take that step because it means I have to address the dirty room. And so for them to address the dirty room, that means they're going to have to get a little dirty and pull things out and go through that in order to be, like you said, proactive in calling out what is racist or what is a prejudice at the root of all forms of bias, or whether it's racism, sexism, xenophobia, whatever it may be, and be proactive and say, okay, I need to clean this out, and I need to move forward and call out and maybe help others clean out their dirty room.
So I want to play off that. You say help others clean out the dirty room. And I want to go around. I know it's more than just a 5-step process, but what are the culturally competent HR leader of the future? Say this culturally competent HR leader goes into a new business who has all that dirty laundry. Madison, you first, what are the first 5 things that you are doing to both not only rid the dirty laundry, wash the dirty laundry, and make sure we have no dirty laundry, and then ultimately spruce the place up with Tide?
So, for me, I talk about this a lot. I'm a really big believer in fire your racists, fire your homophobes, fire your bad people. And I know that I get called a lot of names because I say that. And at the end of the day, you should want to work with good people. Point blank. And yes, there are some things that are microaggressions and biases, but there are some people who are inherently, openly hateful. So the first thing I need people to do is be comfortable getting rid of those people. I don't care if they're a high performer. I don't care if they've been there 10 years. I don't care if Joe Bob, the president, is their cousin. I don't care. You just have to be able to get rid of bad people who are harming your population. Second off, you can't expect people to know what they don't know. Meaning you have to be willing to provide the education around what it actually means to be anti-racist, what it means to create space for people. And I don't mean that once a year Band-Aid DEI workshop that everyone sits through at the same time and 30% of people are texting and 30% are just thrilled to be away from their desk. It needs to be more than that, and it needs to be a constant conversation. Education does not happen in a 1-hour seminar once a year. It's not how the human brain works. And so constant conversation, having the ability to have hard conversations. I think in this world where, again, I don't call myself HR, but in this people profession, I think sometimes we really shy away from hard conversations because sometimes they're polarizing. However, I think it's really important to be able to say, hey, Black Lives Matter, this is why. It's not enough to make it a hashtag and put it on your Instagram. If you cannot explain to your population why that is your stance and why Black Lives Matter, then you have no business posting it online for your customers. So those are my top 3 is what needs to happen right now in this world that we're living in. I need those to be the next steps for everyone. But the conversation needs to continue. And I think that's the part that scares me right now the most, is that this is a trending topic. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, it was a catalyst, but I need the catalyst to continue. I can't have it be a 2020 thing and then 2021 we're on to something different. It needs to be a constant conversation. Otherwise, you end up just backtracking over all the progress you made, because then you're now explaining it again in 2.5 years when the same situation arises.
Cool. So I'm gonna take yours. My top 5 are similar yet different. Number 1 is having those hard conversations, and those conversations of the people who have been have been denying promotions, who have been accused of racism, sexual harassment. That is the, we talk about anti-racist, not racist, Band-Aid versus surgery, versus amputation. The amputation is the thing that needs to happen. But before anything else, you have to cut those who are negatively impacting others in your organization the most. We talked about Breonna Taylor, we talked about Ahmaud Arbery, and we talked about George Floyd. But let's also talk about, the Amy Coopers, who had a position of power, who probably, not saying she did, but probably, based on her actions, made life miserable for Black, for brown, for other women, for men in her organization. And sometimes they're even more toxic, but they're the ones who go unnoticed. And so it's getting those people first. Then my second is teaching people, not about racism or anything like that, but how to do performance reviews. Because here's the thing. That's where some of the biggest bias comes in HR leaders. I think, that's the biggest thing you need to understand. Yes, a performance review is an opinion, but it needs to be an educated opinion based on data. You have to have metrics. You need to create metrics. It's not about how a person looks. It's not about anything like that. It's, did they do the work done? Is the work impactful to the organization? And are the do they have good relationships with their coworkers? And I don't mean, do they go out and party with them or anything like that, or are they Facebook friends? But are they functional members of the organization? So that would be number two. I think number three for my dirty laundry would be look at pay. This is something that is coming to the forefront. Women make 81 cents on the dollar to men. Black women make even less. Hispanic women make even less. Pay equity and full transparency with pay is a good way to start, the openness and to start almost that anti-racism process in your organization. I think that's something that gets overlooked. I know people are like, I don't really want to share pay, but guess what? Your people in your organization are talking, and better to be open about it than not. And if you're open about it, make sure you're equitable about it. So if I were you, some actionable steps I would take: look at salary.com, look at how to job band, make different levels of different positions. Madison might be a VP of people 3, I might be a VP of people 1. So we're still the same position, but it might be a different job. It might be a different job band. So that's a great way for pay equity. And then somebody says, well, why? Well, make sure you also have inclusive job descriptions and inclusive roles. These are all ways for you to systematize and stamp out bias and racism in your organization. And I think the last one is really take to heart corporate social responsibility. You are a tax-paying member of your community, and I think that is the most important. I think that is the most important thing out there. Is you have to take a stand of what goes on in your community. I believe Kazik Price, who's an equity officer in Austin, and he said, what good is work? What good is the work that you do if it's not impacting the community, or you're not affecting the community at all? And I don't care whether you sell a real estate SaaS software. I don't care whether you are in construction. I don't care whether you do a sports software. You live and work in a certain community. How are you going about affecting equity in that community? Kevin, I want to hear yours, unless Madison had anything else to say.
I wanted to follow back up on the Amy Cooper thing. Let's be very clear. I can't name a single Black woman who doesn't feel like she's worked with an Amy Cooper. And so I think part of the 5 things has to include, as leaders, being very aware of what our middle management is doing. Middle management is so often very good at managing up, but then terrible to their people. And so not only are you opening up yourself for a giant liability, you're just opening yourself up for really harmful environments. And so I think as leaders, we have to be really in tune with what's going on underneath our direct reports. I think a lot of time it gets swept under the rug and it kind of gets ignored. And then 5 years later, you find out Amy Cooper is a terrible racist. But if you had it kind of like ears on the ground, chances are you probably would have known.
So I want to add to that because I think a great statistic, a great KPI that that executives can use when judging middle managers. Obviously, there is no like racism quotient, but hiring manager batting average is great. And I'm sure a lot of you that are watching this use it, but what it does is it measures retention from a specific manager. So that retention can be obviously dependent on the industry, but it can be 6 months, it can be a year. If an average is a year, then and 3 people left, and your manager has 8 reports, well, then that hiring manager batting average is like 54%. And I think that's a great way to sort of bring equity to the hiring manager process, because too many times HR gets stuck with, well, we're on retention, but I'm not managing that engineer. I'm not managing that executive. I'm not managing somebody else. And hiring manager batting average is a great way to sort of dig into that organization and say, oh, like actually Linda's the problem, or Jerry's the problem. Rather than saying turnover as a whole, because yes, you can see an organization's turnover, but once again, if you let somebody who's disrupting the system stay in that system, well, then that goes to the whole organization. Let's call it what it is. A bad leader is, I would call it a pandemic. So it's bad leadership is contagious. But Kevin, what about you? You're obviously somebody who is out in the West Texas world. What are 5 ways that West Texas leaders can really get that dirty laundry out of the room and create a new clean room?
So I want to start with something that Madison said about middle managers. And middle managers, and really managers in general, account for 70% of an employee's experience. So yes, if they're bad managers, it's going to continue to create issues like you were talking about, Adam. But I think a lot of organizations, when they invest into leadership development, it's spent in 2 levels: early talent and upper level management, and they miss out on those middle managers, where really most of the issues that could be solved exist. So I think for leaders in West Texas, how do you move forward and create diverse, inclusive, equitable workspaces? Well, one, you got to call out what you see. So you've got to kind of take an audit of your organization, and whether that means you're looking at the people that you've hired, and does it match up with the demographics in the area? If the demographics say that this percentage of the population is Black, or if this percent of the population is Hispanic, or this percentage of the population is white, does that represent your organization? And so take audit of what's going on, but you got to start with taking audit, but then you got to talk to the C-suite, or the owners of the company, or the president of the organization, and say, look, if we're going to create a culture that is diverse and inclusive, culture starts at the top, but it's executed from the ground up. And so number 2, I believe you've got to really have that good game plan, but you've got to have it set every single day. You can have a whole bunch of values that you post on your, the wall when people walk into, the office, and it's like, we are, a warm, close company, or, we do X, Y, Z, or, we're inclusive. But if you don't talk about it on a daily basis, and it doesn't have to be anything big. It could be just, hey, if you've got a daily, login for employees, and you pull up the intranet, and hey, here's, a piece of our culture and it pops up before they can really move forward. So it's just constantly in their face. Or if it's a weekly newsletter, or if you've got monthly meetings, you're constantly talking about the values and the culture of your organization. Because people, if it's not talked about, no, like Matt was saying, if you're only doing a seminar once a year, nobody's going to care. You've got to talk about it, almost religiously. Like, this is who we are. This is what we believe of who the organization, not necessarily what the mission of the organization, but who we are as an organization.
So I think, sorry, go ahead.
You got to talk about it, constantly. And you've got to train up your leaders to also talk about it constantly, and reward those who champion causes for diversity or inclusion, and have that open space, for, hey, let's, once a month, let's create opportunity for where we can learn from others and elevate other voices that aren't being elevated. So those would be, I'm trying to think through what would, my top 5. Those, I think, to me are just the minimum you've got to get going.
I think something that, sorry, I don't mean to steal your thunder, but I think something that to kind of summarize all your points is one word, and I think it's intention. I think a lot of people, they post things to post things, they do things to do things, and they miss the intention. And I think it happens not only in work but in life too. A relationship, when you get into a relationship with somebody, the things you do are intentional. Like, I am intentional about marrying somebody. I am intentional about, kids, about building a life. I am intentional about teaching my kids. And I think that's the same thing that you have to teach your employees as well. If culture is to come from the ground up, as executives, you have to show that every day. What am I doing every day as a $250,000 a year executive to show this $15 an hour person, because minimum wage shouldn't be $7.25. But what am I showing this $15 an hour person that, that the values that I exude? Because if I am not showing them, why does this person feel that they need to, why does this person feel that they need to show them too?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with, being intentional is, if there's no intention, then it doesn't matter what you do.
Agreed. Sorry, I couldn't tell if someone else was going to talk. And I think the other thing is like being intentional, but also being genuine. I think a lot of times, especially like in the startup world, people do a lot of things to make their board happy or make their investors happy. And like, that's not real. That's not real life. Like right now, there's so many DEI roles open just because everyone's boards are in like a full out panic. Like, how do we not get sued? How do we not have an Amy Cooper? And like, I need the intentions to also be genuine. Like, don't go around faking that you care about Black people if you don't. Please don't do that. And so I think for me, like, it needs to be intentional, and it also needs to be setting the tone that there is no wiggle room for hate. Like, not like, for me, I'm a really big believer in a no tolerance policy. Like, I accept no wiggle room for hateful comments. I don't care if you posted it on LinkedIn, you sent it in an email. Like, I'm not going to have this conversation. I'm not going to teach grown adults how to be good humans. And so I think as leaders, like, it's important to set that tone from day one. Like, from your job descriptions to your interview, like, these are the things we believe, this is how we operate. And like, there's no room for gray area, because with racism and anti-racism, there is no gray area. Either you're racist or you're anti-racist, and you're not going to tell me there's an in-between.
I want to, so something you mentioned about is the influx of DEI roles, which obviously you and I tend to share them back and forth and have a good laugh at a few of them, based on some of the verbiage that is used with organizations. Let's talk about that, because I think some organizations are trying to go from 0 to 100, but as you know, as anybody knows, you can't really, to be able to go from crawling to running, you have to do walking first. And say I'm an organization that wants to have a DEI role. You know, what are some things that I should look at? And once again, you know, Madison, Kevin, I want to hear from the both of you. What are some things I should look at, or I should start before I even think about hiring like DEI program manager or VP of diversity and inclusion?
I really want people to think about the why. Why are you hiring this role? Is it because your board told you to, or an investor mentioned it? Because you feel like you should have a brown person in the C-suite. Because I think a lot of times these roles are hired and it's to be a brown stock photo for the external appearances. And so now this person is here and they have no ability to create change. They have no ability to make decisions for themselves. They're basically just like running on a hamster wheel over and over and over, but nothing gets done because no one lets them make any decisions. And so I need people to, one, think of the why, but then think about how do I empower this person to actually create change, which is hard for a lot of C-suite because that means actually like letting go of the reins and like letting someone else kind of steer the ship a little bit in regards to your people. But also, are you going to be ready to get called out on maybe the bad behaviors you have yourself? Because if you're not ready to have that conversation, then you're not ready to hire that role.
Yeah, I completely agree with Madison on this. If you got to answer the why, because I feel like looking at the number of C-suite professionals and all of the organizations that I'm connected with, when they hire for a DEI role, it's a place filler. They're just hiring someone just to hire someone, and I think for a lot of organizations, it's a start, but it's not necessarily the best start. And so you've got to for organizations in West Texas that want to move in that direction and hire someone into a DEI role, I think as a leader, like Madison was saying, you've got to be willing to empower them and trust them. And that may mean you're going to make some investments into the organization, and you've got to be willing to make those investments. And that could be financial investments. And it may cost quite a bit. I know one of the big investments that's being discussed right now here in Midland, one of the high schools, which was built in 1961, is Robert E. Lee High School. And the school district recently voted to change the name, and rightly so. But people are complaining that, well, what about the cost to change the name? We've got to buy new uniforms for the football team and all the athletics department. We've got to change out all the signage. We've got to do, whatever it is to remove the name and replace it with whatever comes next. And people are balking like that could cost anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million plus. And so, but you've got to be willing to make that investment in order to move forward and have that change.
So I want to go with something completely different because, well, I think as Madison said, some people are just using this DEI role just to hire Black people. And why are you using the DEI role when you could hire them in marketing, when you could hire people in product, when you could hire them as your VP of people, when you could hire them as your CFO? Why do that? So I ask you first, before you go, I want to hire a director of diversity and inclusion, I want you to start from the bottom. What does your representation look like? What is your exit? Look at your Black and brown employees and your LGBTQ employees. Look at their exit interviews, because you have to root out if there are problems with the system or there are problems with the managers. Well, then hiring the DEI person is not going to do anything. And why not say, what if there's a Black female who's a head of marketing? What does this DEI person know that she doesn't know? Why can't you help empower her and compensate her to help create an employee resource group. Start from there and build a coalition versus maybe maybe getting that one position, because I think a lot of people, as she said, want to hire just for a stock photo. But if you're not intentional and you just want a stock photo, you're not going to get the desired results, because after 2-3 months, that person's going to burn out, and you're going to want to hire another one, and it's going to look really bad. And I know, Madison, you had a point, so I'm going to mute.
No, I was just going to say, so I think the other thing is, like, people want to hire Black stock photos. They don't want a Black person who's going to have opinions and make waves. They want, like, the nice, quiet, soft-spoken, straight hair Black person, and that's not reality. People have hired me before because I make them look interesting, I make them look diverse, but then it's like, when I call you on the things that are wrong, then it's scary, then I'm a threat, then I'm, mean, and then I'm the angry Black woman. And so I think part of the issue with these DEI roles is, like, you don't want Black women and Black people in general to make waves, but then you hire them for this role that is intentionally supposed to make waves. So I have a huge issue with that when you ask people to come in and tone it down to keep you comfortable. No, I'm good.
I think the concept, like, yeah, hey, I'm just going to hire a diversity and inclusion manager, but, like, why isn't the president just making an environment welcoming? Why? And I think West Texas HR leaders, that's what you need to realize is, why are you not creating a welcoming workplace in the first place? And yes, guess what? Like, I know some of you say, well, work should be a family. And you know what? Some people say that, it's true. If you're going to say that, well, then you have to create an environment where people feel safe coming to you as HR, but you as HR are not keeping secrets. You are actively stamping out the issues. That has been a gigantic issue. I think that since George Floyd, that we've seen is bad HR has come out, and bad HR has been gotten rid of. Even 2 years ago, I can relate a story. It's not necessarily inclusion focused, but it's about bad HR. When the Dallas Mavericks HR team let some top sales executives fester for years in the organization just because they were high performers. But guess what? They drove out a bunch of potential high performers, and they destroyed the business side of the organization. So HR leaders, if you're really going to have an inclusive space, make sure people feel safe coming to you, but also do something about those problems, and don't protect those people who are bad actors, even if you're friends. I mean, that's like DEI in a nutshell.
I think, so for me personally, I think that's why I've never actively referred to myself as HR, because I think too often it feels like the people who protect the business and not the people who protect the people. And, like, inherently, my calling and my passion is to protect my people. I am not going to protect, like, the business in order to keep them out of a scandal and, like, throw someone else under the bus because of that. Like, I'm not ever going to be that person. And so I also agree, like, I think sometimes HR gets a bad rep because we're just the people who, like, you come in the room and everyone stops talking. I don't want to be that person. I want to be that person that you feel safe coming to me with the things that are affecting you, harming you, the things that make you happy, rather than, if I tell you this, you're just going to tell someone else and I'm going to get fired because I told you so-and-so's a racist. I'm tired of living in a world where it's scarier to call someone a racist than to actually be the racist.
I want to just, like, hone in on one point that you made. You are responsible for the well-being of the employee. I think a lot of people feel like HR leaders, they're like, you know what, we got to protect the business. But if you protect the well-being of the employee, then you protect the well-being of the business. And I think people don't understand that. By taking a stand, by stamping out the problems, and by being a people first HR leader, you protect the business regardless.
Plot twist: firing racists protects your business.
Like,
none of us are above an away scandal. I know that we talk about it. NDAs really protect the business, and they really harm a lot of people because you can't talk about things that happen, but literally not a single one of us is above an away scandal. You know how you avoid an away scandal? You fire bad people.
I mean, you know how you, I mean, it's just, and it's, you know how you avoid an Amy Cooper? You fire those Amy Coopers, you discipline those Amy Coopers. And as HR leaders, you do in every quarter audit of your performance reviews, you know, what employees are getting harmed, what employees are getting harmed, what employees are getting hurt. These are things as HR leaders. This is all part of being anti-racist HR. It's very simple concepts. You don't need a bachelor's degree for this. You don't need a PhD. It's all about, as an HR leader, I think you need to wake up every day and say, how can I make this world a better place? How can I stamp out bad and promote good in my workplace, in my family life, in my work life?
A plus, 10 out of 10. Agreed.
Any thoughts, Kevin?
No, I completely agree with both of y'all on that. And it's going to be messy. You know, to use a knife analogy, sometimes you have to hack away with a machete before you can get you know, to where you're using an X-Acto knife and make those small things. So you're going to have to make some changes, and you know, you're gonna have people go kicking and screaming, unfortunately, but that's how change happens. At least one thing is always constant, and that's change. And change for the better is something we can always look forward to.
I think, Kevin, I think you're right. HR professionals need to be expert change professionals. You need to learn how to manage change. You need to know how to create change. COVID and everything that's going on around the conversation surrounding racism, and you know, it's not just social justice, it's racism, is something that HR professionals need to understand how to create change around. And if you don't know how to create change, if you don't know how to create change, then you're gonna be left behind. And I think that's something that people really should understand.
I also think we have to be willing to not tap dance around these hard conversations, and I think that's a part of a lot of people in this role. You know, we're really taught to have like the legal, not fuzzy and warm conversation. But we have to be willing to have these hard conversations about racism for exactly what it is, not talking about it in the way of KPIs, not talking about it in a way that's, you know, the right legalese. We have to be able to talk about it at the human level, how racism affects our employees in their day-to-day life, not only within our organization, but when they leave. Because all of that stuff that happens when they leave, they're bringing that to work, because you don't come to work every day and like take off your human sweater and clock in from 8 to 5. Like, for me, after George Floyd, it was incredibly hard to work because it's just heartbreaking, because it easily could have been my dad, my cousin, it could have been me. And so you take all of that to work with you. And if we're not willing to have that conversation with people, then we'll never understand or be able to have the conversations of like, hey, I'm not 100 this week. And instead you end up people who are punished for performance, when in fact there are exterior issues that are weighing on them. And I think it's important to be able to have that conversation and make those distinctions.
I think the theme is, you know, of this session, have hard conversations, learn to create change, be okay with discomfort, be okay with getting called out, because that's part of education. And you know, if you need people to help you walk through this, Madison and I, and Kevin as well, are all here to help you on this journey. Because guess what? This is a journey that's unfamiliar to a lot of people, except those people who have experienced it. And, you know, I think, I mean, white HR leaders especially, like that is something that that needs to be understood, is, you know, these lived experiences, we have to be able to understand them, and if we don't, we have to bring somebody in who does. And you know, that's really how you create change and create a truly anti-racist HR.
Agreed.
Yeah, I want to leave one last thought. and I'm going to quote Representative Lewis again from his letter. He says, when you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state, it is an act. So I think for HR leaders in West Texas, we need to make sure that when we see something that's wrong, we speak up and we act.
I think that's a great way to close this out. And once again, I think if anybody needs help in these topics, you have 3 people here to help you out.
Madison and Adam, thank you for this presentation. And if anybody needs to reach out to Adam or Madison or myself, all 3 of us are available on LinkedIn. It's probably the best place to connect with us. We hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. If you've got questions, leave them in the chat box below, and we'll do our best to answer those. So thanks for watching.